Hi everyone, this is BritSimon. The Visa Bulletin was published this morning, and I would like to go over that with you to explain a couple of things that people may have noticed and that some people are concerned about. The Visa Bulletin is shown here. I extract the numbers and paste them into my articles. There's been pretty good progression, 45,175 for Africa. Asia has gone up from 15,800 to 18,450. Europe has gone up from 21,200 to 30,000. Oceania is, I'll have to check in a moment actually, I think that's pretty much current. 2150 is about the number, the maximum number that that is actually that any selectee had. South Africa has gone up as roughly in line with what I expect. It's not going up in line with what people with very high case numbers are expecting. People with case numbers over 3,000 are at risk. But to what I think is going to be a likely cutoff around about the 3,000 number, that's that's roughly within line with the pace I would expect for South America, and South America has no reason to have ups and downs like some of the other regions because there's a very consistent case number progression all the way through the range. There's no sort of big cliffs to fall off. Anyway, the bit that I wanted to really cover was let me just put in I'll show you the Visa Bulletin. The bit I wanted to cover was this. After the Visa Bulletin numbers, there's a piece of text which is shown which is quite interesting. So as we scroll down to, these are the numbers that I've just shown you, and here's the statement that I want to draw your attention to. So it talks about the cutoff movements in all regions continue to be greater than might ordinarily have been expected. In order to generate an applicant demand under the respective respective annual limits. Okay, so let's just finish off this text, but I'll come back and explain what that means. This is because fewer DV applicants are actively pursuing final action on their cases at consular posts abroad, and the volume of USCIS adjustment cases remains low. If large number of applicants eventually do begin to have their cases brought to final action, rank cutoff date movements will necessarily slow or stop, and retrogression would become a possibility. At this time, it's not possible to say when such action may be required, but late summer would be the most likely time. Okay, so let's go back and analyze that statement a little bit and just make sure we're all clear on what that means. So what they're saying is the movements, for example, let's take Europe as an example. The movement from 21,200 to 30,000 is a little bit more than I had predicted. It shows that within the case number range that we're talking about, if you watched a video I put out there a couple of weeks ago, there was a prediction from me that explained how they actually come up with these numbers. It explains the number of cases they need to interview month to month in order to issue the number of visas they expect to issue, and I took a number of interviews that could be available in Europe and calculated back with an expected number of responses in this case meaning responses, DS260 is submitted, but also the documents have been submitted and processed. So I was assuming roughly a 60% response rate, and with that I calculated a case number range, I think from 26.5 to 28.5, something in that range. It's higher than that, 30,000 is higher than that, which means that their response rate is lower than what I had assumed. and because of that, they have to increase the numbers more than they would ordinarily have been expected. Right? That's what that first statement means. They've gone higher in the numbers than they would otherwise have expected to need. So, and it explains that in the next sentence. This is because fewer DV applicants are actively pursuing final action on their cases at consular posts abroad. It actually has nothing to do with consular posts abroad. It's really about submitting DS-260 and the documents to KCC. And actually, I think that even this statement is slightly incorrect. I think probably a lot of people have sent their documents to KCC back in October and November that have not yet been processed. And we've got into this sort of weird position that KCC are in, and they've explained this to me that there are two departments now. One is the KCC normal team that is working in Kentucky and will answer the phone calls when you call, and they respond to your case inquiries, etc. That team is separate from the team that is doing the documents, right? And so there's a different email address, and they're actually in a different location, so same building, I believe, but a different part of the same building. And the two departments are not allowed to communicate. This was a sort of a revelation that was told to me a few weeks ago by the manager of KCC. They're actually not able to communicate from one department to another, and it's not by accident. That's by design. They have, for some reason, they've separated. You might understand the term ring fence. They've ring fenced these two departments, and so now one department can't communicate with the other, and vice versa. I'm not sure why they did that, but it's not helpful. It's not helpful to the process, and it's frustrating. So what actually happens is you can only contact KCC. KCC will tell you, if you ask them about your documents, they'll tell you they don't know until you're current, right? So until your case number is current, they don't have access to see your documents and whether they've been processed or not. Excuse me. So that leaves them in a really difficult position. And by making more case numbers available now, more cases current, they have presumably made it more possible for them to see more cases. So that will be helpful. If your case number, for example, is under EU 30,000, you should now be able to contact KCC, and they should be able to tell you whether or not your documents have been processed. But it won't be until the end of this month, when we see how many cases have been scheduled for interview, to see whether the backlog really has been dealt with, as the KCC manager, Philip, had told me that they have been. So at that point, I'm hoping that the numbers between 21,200 and 30,000, and the backlog cases below 21,200, I'm hoping that will be something like 12 or 1,300 interviews that are being generated. So I'm hoping that way. Now I'll talk about coronavirus in a moment, because that's another aspect of this that we can't possibly ignore. But I'll address that in a moment. But you'll see what's sort of going on. This confusion between the two different departments, the inability to communicate, etc., is causing difficulties. And it may be that when we now can have people asking KCC for their status on cases below 30,000 EU, for example, the people will have there will be selectees who will be telling me, "Oh, I sent my documents in November, and I just asked KCC, and they said they're not completed yet. Why not? Does it take all this time to process them?" No, it doesn't take all this time. It means that they didn't receive the documents back in November. So that's going to be a remaining difficulty here, something that we're going to have to handle over the next few months. There are 4 VBs left after this Visa Bulletin that's just been published. So mathematically, as I've explained before, we're pretty much where we need to be in terms of the Visa Bulletin numbers. But there is a difficulty in terms of, I think, particularly in certain regions, there's going to be a difficulty with scheduling enough cases to actually to get to the end of the numbers. We'll have to see how that goes. People are going to ask me about Africa. Africa has only gone from 41 to 45,175. That slowdown is something equivalent to the 21 to 21,200 slowdown that Europe experienced a couple of months ago. It represents the catching up process of the backlog on cases less than 41,000. So backlog cases have been dealt with, and that means that there are more interviews to be scheduled with cases under 41,000, so they didn't need to release many more numbers. That's basically what's happened there. And so it's not bad, though. We had 2 months where we had very good progress in Africa. It isn't a surprise that they need to take a slowdown here at that point. And we're about 30,000 cases away from the high number in Africa. So, in terms of case number progress, could they do 30,000 numbers in 4 months? Yes, absolutely, they could, if there's enough capacity in the embassies, etc. Asia is fine. Asia mathematically is going to go current. The number of cases between 18,450 and the final number of cases is very, very low. At this level, there are no more cases at this level for Nepal and for Iran, so the density of cases is very low. So Asia's not really got a problem, although again there may be problems with coronavirus. Oceania, pretty much exactly where we need to be, and South America exactly where I think it needs to be, bearing in mind that I don't believe it's going to go to 4,000 as a final case number. So if you're thinking it's going to get to 4,000, I think we're seeing evidence and proof that it's not going to get there. We've only got 4 months left, and in the 8 months it's gone to 1875. It doesn't seem reasonable that the remaining 4 months would have that same number as all over again and more. So I think that's becoming clear. So from this statement, before we talk about coronavirus in a moment, from this statement, there's this remaining bit here which I need to explain. It says, if large number of applicants eventually do begin their cases, eventually do begin the cases to have their cases brought to final action, rank cutoff date movements will necessarily slow or stop, and retrogression could become a possibility. What does that mean? Retrogression. Retrogression is going backwards in the numbers. So it means that if, for example, cases below 45,175 suddenly flooded in Africa, suddenly flooded KCC with documents and DS260s, etc., and there were many more people who wanted interviews than they previously knew about, it's possible that they would need to reduce the number from 45,175 downwards, right, in a later month. Same thing for any region. Could be for Europe, could be for any of the regions, right? Now, retrogression, I've been dealing with DV Lottery since 2013. I've only ever seen it happen one time. This was in DV 2018 and happened to Africa. Africa had been made current in the final months, and for 1 month, I think for the from memory, I think it was for August interviews, it was made current. It went from 38,000 to current, and the actual numbers of selectees were going up to about 55,000 or so. So it was current for August, and there were a few interviews scheduled for cases under the 55,000 all the way through the range up to 55,000. Then the final Visa Bulletin of DV 2018, which was issued in July for September interviews, went backwards, retrogressed. It went down to 39,500, I think it was, or 39,000 thereabouts. And it suddenly slammed the door on people that were assuming they were about to get an interview. And that's what retrogression is. So it can happen. So not only can we see a region not increase or increase by a very small amount, a region could actually go backwards. That's what retrogression is. Now, is that going to happen? I think it's a low possibility, because what's more likely to happen is we're going to continue as we are, with cases finally getting their documents processed, etc. And we'll get there, but the number of interviews that they can have in any given month limits the amount of progression that we have anyway. So I don't think retrogression would happen, but it could do. Who knows? So let's talk about the other big thing, which is the coronavirus. So the impact of the coronavirus is being felt mainly in China, some Asian countries. Europe is having a tough time with coronavirus, and America is starting to wake up to coronavirus, I would say. At this time, the number of people who are diagnosed with coronavirus in the USA is quite low. But that's because they're not testing enough people in the USA. The actual rate of infection is probably higher than America understands. And since most people in good health suffer a few days of high temperature and flu-like symptoms, etc., with coronavirus, it's not the biggest deal, although it's obviously very dangerous to people who are in ill health or are older, etc. Now, because of the preparation, you'll see that Trump is banning entries from the Schengen area of Europe. He has several states have placed themselves into a state of emergency, which doesn't mean people are running around like headless chickens. It means that they have the ability to spend money and to make plans on this unusual item. And I think Trump actually today, he is shortly to speak, and I think he's going to put a national emergency on the whole of USA. I wouldn't be at all surprised if that's what he does. So it seems like we are in the USA, we are sort of getting to terms with what's about to happen, which is what's going to happen, or what is happening in countries like Italy in Europe, where there's quite a large number of people becoming sick, and even though there's not that many deaths through this, there's a lot of people being sick. Now, what will that mean for the USA? What's happening now is they're cancelling, they're closing some schools in some states. For example, Kentucky, where Kentucky Consular Center, KCC, is located, the schools have just announced that they're closing for the whole state, which means on a purely sort of general level, the staff at KCC, probably some of those people are going to have to deal with childcare issues at home. So that's obviously going to affect our processing. And in the same way, my company has told me and all of my my colleagues at my company that if we can work at home, we should work at home. And a lot of companies are doing the same thing. So that is going to impact the way business gets done in the USA, and it could start to impact the way that embassies abroad handle their operations as well. We might see KCC working with reduced numbers. We could see the agencies that KCC need to work with working with reduced numbers. Therefore, it might take longer to process documents, etc. We could see embassies having interviews scheduled but cancelling them. Right? We could easily see that. Embassies, they'll either be fearful of exposing their staff to the virus, or they won't want people to congregate in waiting rooms, etc., while they wait for their visa interview, and so they might decide to reduce the amount of operations they go through. They'll certainly do that on non-immigrant cases. They may also do that on immigrant cases. So people keep asking me what could happen. Could this country be affected? Could I be affected by coronavirus? The short answer is we could all be affected by coronavirus and the impact to the processing, because we just don't know what's going to happen. So that's something that we need to prepare for, and it could change the way the rest of the year plays out. And I don't know what that means. I don't know. I can't see the future. I can't see what will happen, and I can't see the impacts from what might happen. So I really can't answer the questions that people are asking me about what will happen. I don't know, is the honest answer. I don't know what will happen, and none of you do either. Nobody knows. We just have to wait and see what will transpire. Okay, so obviously a worrying time, obviously a difficult time for a lot of you that are waiting for your interviews, etc. But really at the moment, your worrying won't help. So you just have to try and remain relaxed, remain calm, and see what happens. Wait and see what happens. Okay, so I'm not going to make any predictions about where cutoffs will be, etc. Partly for that reason, we don't know how individual countries will be affected, nor the centralized operations of KCC, etc. Okay, so I hope that's been helpful. I hope that helps you understand what's going on a little bit. This year, like other years, has got its own wrinkles. When you're at the beginning of when people find out in this coming May that they are winners, a lot of them will want black and white answers of what will happen, when exactly will I get interviewed, and frankly, who knows is going to be the answer, as it is every year, because we can't predict what will happen during during an 18-month period. There are all sorts of things. Who knew that the impact of the document process was going to be so great on this process? Who knew that Trump was going to turn around and implement travel bans left, right, and centre? Either for xenophobic or for overreactions, perhaps, to the coronavirus. Who knew? Who knew that the coronavirus was going to hit us and be so impactful? Nobody knows. Nobody knows how these things will happen, and so that was true a year ago. It's going to be true again in the next year, and we just don't know what will happen next, which is why wait and see is always the right answer, because until something has actually happened, you can't predict it correctly. Okay, that's it for now. Keep well, everyone. Keep washing your hands, and make sure not to pass on the virus to others. Even if you're healthy and you are not concerned about it for yourself, do consider that someone you pass on the virus to may have elderly parents at home that could be greatly impacted by the virus. So it's common sense at the moment to stay socially distant. Hygiene standards need to be high. Wash your hands with soap and water, warm water. Wash for 30 seconds at least, and try and just adopt some common sense procedures. Okay, all right. Thanks everyone. Bye bye now.